So thank you everybody for joining me tonight. My name is Ken Rosenthal. I'm a park naturalist at Gulf Branch Nature Center. And tonight's deep dive is on spring ephemerals. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started on that. I'm not always able to check the chat while we're going on, but since we're all adults here, if you need to unmute and grab my attention, ask me a question, please do while we're in the moment. At the end, I will try to check the chat in case there are any questions in there that you felt could wait until the end. We'll take a look at them and see what we can answer. So let me. Did I hit the? Oh, yeah, I hit the wrong option. There we go. So as I said, we're going to talk about spring ephemerals today. Okay, this is a patch of bluebells. I can't even remember where I took this. I think this might be at Patuxent in Maryland. What we're going to do today is we are going to talk about ephemeral plants, and specifically we're going to talk about spring ephemerals, which you can find in our region. Ephemerals are plants that grow they quickly in a short amount of time, and they're usually taking advantage of a window when resources are available. So it's sometimes I always like to think of it as like slipping in the door while someone else is holding it before they go in. They're trying to, quickly do what takes a lot of time for other organisms, and they're doing it before those organisms start, so they don't have to compete or lose because they're not able to compete. There are several types of ephemerals that you can look up more about. We're going to talk about spring ephemerals. There are desert ephemerals, and I think it should be pretty obvious. If you've got a dry season and a wet season, that dry season is probably not when you're going to want to be growing in a desert. So desert ephemerals take advantage of those favorable seasons, those wet seasons. This is in, I think, South Africa is where this is, and these are daisies, and this is a really nice bloom of daisies in a spot with during the wet season. I tried really hard to find a similar picture from the same park when it was dry to show you the difference, and apparently no one thought it was important to take a picture at that time when it was dry and there was no flowers. But there's some really beautiful pictures of this area when the wildflowers are in bloom. They can survive those dry periods through seed dormancy or dieback, and essentially what that means is if you're a plant that's perennial, not going to regrow, everything above the ground dies back during the dry season, and you start a new year of growth when it gets wet, and then your seeds can be dormant. If you go through seed dormancy, your seeds are dormant until conditions are favorable, and that can be an entire year, maybe a couple years, depending on how long your seeds can survive dormancy and how long it takes for conditions to get to the point where it's safe and a good time to grow. You will find some of these around here, especially along the Potomac, mudflat ephemerals. These are plants that are going to take advantage of fluctuating water levels, and usually they're taking advantage of the low water periods. And they can grab some space real quick, get the nutrients and the other essential things they need, grow quickly, reproduce, and then die off before all the water levels go back up till they're too high for them to grow. This is water willow. It's one of my favorite plants. When I found it, I thought I discovered something completely new because it's something I'd never heard of, and it's a really gorgeous little plant. And this picture was taken. We go to, I think it was Turkey Run, and one of the paths that lead right out next to the Potomac there, and it's an area where you can see where when the Potomac is high, it rushes right through there. But as the river gets lowered at certain periods, there's this big patch of it there, and it's just alive. It's really, really beautiful flower. I've also found this actually at Gravelly Point right across from National Airport, right next to the water as well. So again, it's a really beautiful flower, but these plants take advantage of low water periods in order to exploit an opening in the environment. And then there are weedy ephemerals, which I think in some ways is just another name is ruderals, because they have rapid growth, short lives, and high seed production. And I think it's very descriptive of a pioneer species or invasive species. They exploit a disturbed area through rapid growth, and if they exploit it well enough, some species can actually dominate that disturbed area and prevent other species from joining. Other times they are simply very well adapted for that early period of taking advantage of a disturbed area, and then once it's gone, I'm sorry, once oh, I'm blanking on the succession begins and other species begin to grow, they can no longer compete and they can no longer survive, and they essentially they are removed from that ecosystem by selection. So you might find them there. This is hairy bittercrest, if I remember correctly, Cardamine hirsuta, and this is one of the walls at the Gulf Branch Nature Center where I work. It's just growing on the side there. So this one is a really hardy species. Very good at taking advantage of whatever little niche it can find. We actually removed a bunch of this out of one of our flower beds earlier this week. But we're here to talk about spring ephemerals. This is Yellow Lady Slipper over here on the right. And I thought this was a really nice definition, which is why I copied it and credited the website. But their spring ephemerals are early blooming, short-lived wildflowers that emerge in early spring and disappear by early summer. Certainly the flowers are very quick and early on in spring. I found a lot of discrepancy between what people consider spring wildflowers and whether they die back underground or whether they're just growing but they don't have their flowers anymore, and I think there's a bit of leniency some people take with the definition. So we'll talk about a few that are very, very specific to this. We'll talk about a few that maybe live a little bit longer even though they're not in flower, and you can debate whether they're actually a spring ephemeral or not. But this is what they're taking advantage of. Right now, there are no leaves on the trees, and so they're taking advantage of especially that sunlight. This is an opportunity to get in and grow quickly before that canopy comes in and shades out all the really good sunlight. These are species that want that light. They're going to take that light as quick as they can, because once it's shaded out and gone, they may not get the essentially the radiance from the sun that they need because of the tree canopy. And there's a really important ecological niche that many of them fill. And I'm just going to probably scratch the surface. There's probably more than this, but one thing that's really important is when you have these warm days, hopefully you've been seeing insects. It's been, today was in the 60s. I think yesterday was in the 60s. So we're starting to see insects already. This is a two-spotted bumblebee here in the bottom right that was on the back of our house last week. And these other two here, this is I think one of the mining bees. It specializes on spring beauty, which is this. This is a Claytonia species, and then this is bloodroot with a metallic sweat bee, one of the halictids, and all of these are early bees. You're not going to find an insect on bloodroot or spring beauty that only comes out in late summer. These are all early spring organisms, and so these early flowers are very important for these pollinators, and to some extent vice versa, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Oligoledges, I hope I'm saying that right, are specialist pollinators like this particular bee here, which pretty much specializes on Claytonia species, and in this case, this is the Virginia Spring Beauty. So they're really dependent on these early plants, and so they've evolved together, and they mutually benefit from each other. Then this is kind of interesting. So this is Jack in the Pulpit, which is another spring ephemeral. The males have some spaces at the base of this picture. So what happens is often insects can get trapped in here, and smaller ones can get through the spaces, at least on the male plant. And so what you'll find is that fungus gnats like to lay their eggs on, for example, fungus gnats like to lay their eggs on these Jack in the Pulpit plants, and if they get in here, they may be trapped. Now, unlike say a pitcher plant that will actively digest insects that get trapped into this area, the fungus gnat is able to find its way out through some of these gaps at the bottom of this shape. But what happens is they end up with some of the pollen from the male pitcher plant on there. Now, if they find a female pitcher plant, they go back in, they'll pollinate her, but unfortunately, they can't get out because those same spaces and cracks and crevices are not at the bottom of her flower structure. And so that's no good for that fungus gnat. So hopefully they've laid their eggs and been able to extend their genetic inheritance to their next generations. But what happens when you get that pollination is then the female will eventually produce this fruit, and this fruit's very important. Black bears like the corms that these grow from. These fruits can be very important for several animals, including critters like the wood thrush and the wild turkey and grouse. They'll all feed on these jack in the pulpit fruits, so these can be really important. I don't see these very often. I've hiked in places where there's lots of jack in the pulpits, but actually seeing these fruits is not a very common thing. Although if you have jack in the pulpits, but you don't have all these other birds, these critters that eat them, you're more likely to see those fruits if they haven't been consumed. So again, they provide food sources. They provide, and of course, pollinators provide pollination, and so that's all very important. And again, there's not a lot that's going on. This is definitely a jack in the pulpit. You can see with all this growth underneath it. This is a little later in the season, but these early spring ephemerals can be really important at a time when there's not a lot out there for critters to find food for. So let's talk about some of these keys to success. If you're a spring ephemeral, what do you need to do to be a really successful plant? First things first, get yours first. Okay, and what do I mean by that? Look at this. Now this is fall, but still, there's not a whole lot of sunlight. Even with a lot of these leaves falling, there's not a whole lot of sunlight getting through here. That tree canopy is your enemy, and that's what you're trying to raise. You're trying to grow and get pollinated, and then reproduce and get rid of your seeds and do all that before you don't have the sunlight and the energy and the food source that you would have. Okay, when do you start? Well, you're going to start down here in Florida and Georgia and South Carolina before you're going to start in, say, Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania. And you're going to start in our area before you start in Pennsylvania or Maine or even, southern Canada. And so it's kind of a rolling start time. Southern states will start quicker and their weather tends to stabilize a little bit more. But we all know that spring can't be completely dependent on. We'll get to that with point number 2. So it's a rolling start time. I've done a ornithology for Armin, and I'll show these maps where you just show the birds move in, and it's a graph of all the sightings, and it's just this wave that goes up the eastern U.S. into Canada, and it sits there for a while. And that initial wave in spring is very similar to when the blooming times would be for all these critters. As you're going to start in those southern states and move slowly up through the mid-Atlantic and up into the Northeast. And so what's blooming here now in 2, 3, 4 weeks will be blooming further north of us, depending on how far they go. And of course, weather and conditions. So different attitudes for different latitudes. And again, remember, this is what they're trying to take advantage of, is this open space. So there's uninterrupted sunlight. And the other thing that's really neat about this is you have a top-down thaw in your soil. Okay, you've got two heat sources. You've got geothermal heat coming from below, and you've got the sun coming from above. So when you get a freeze, when you get freeze going through the soil and you get colder temperatures, that starts from the top down. And just the same way, when it starts to get warmer and the air temperatures get warmer, then that thaw goes top down as well. Okay, so what you're going to have at this time of year, you've got all this sunlight hitting the ground, and that's going to make some nutrients and some water, especially if you've got snow melt. That's going to make water and nutrients available. But if it's still really cold further down, that's going to slow down bigger trees like this, who don't have like this big tree here in the right. Hopefully you guys can see my cursor. That big tree is not going to have roots that only go 2, 3, 6, 10 inches in the ground. They're going to have really deep roots. And so because it's still going to be colder down there, they're not going to start as quickly gathering water and gathering nutrients as these smaller plants can do on that very upper level. So they don't have the competition from these larger plants for water and soil nutrients initially. So there's a little competition for soil nutrients, there's a little competition for water, and there's nothing really blocking your sunlight yet. Right now, with the exception of some snow, which can be a problem, but there are adaptations for that as well. And again, spring weather can be really tricky, so a lot of these plants may look delicate and they may look fragile, but they have adaptations to hopefully get them through this. But generally, this is the only competition you have. A lot of these trees might be flowering now, but they're not putting any foliage out. They're not putting any leaves out. And so these tiny little flowers on big trees aren't going to take up a whole lot of um, sunlight. They're not going to stop a whole lot of sunlight from reaching you. And again, this is one of the reasons, why those big trees don't have all that foliage, because they don't want to be way down. This is a hemlock, and they're very bendy. They can take these kinds of snow loads and bounce back after the snow goes off. But all the snow is eventually going to get in the soil, and that water is going to be available in early spring, and spring ephemerals can take advantage of that as well. So you got to get yours first, and you got to do it quickly. Okay, don't waste time. Get out there, start growing, get those flowers out right away. And attract those pollinators. This here is Dutchman's breeches, and Dutchman's breeches is pretty much pollinated by bumblebees. So it's pollinated by those early species of bumblebees. They have a proboscis that can get up into those flowers better than other bee species, and so that's really really advantageous for the bumblebees, because they tend to be the only ones that can do this. And it's advantageous for Dutchman's breeches because they've got a pollinator that's going to take advantage of them growing. This is a picture from the Potomac Heritage Trail, I think along Windy Run, perhaps. It's really, really one of my favorite flowers, very pretty. And again, think of that picture of the snow. You're going to hope for the best. You're going to prepare for the worst. Okay, this is bloodroot. I love bloodroot. It's one of my favorite spring ephemerals. It's one of the first ones to come out, if you don't count skunk cabbage, which also is one of my favorites. So this is bloodroot, Sanguinaria canadensis. They have a rhizome that they can use to spread. The rhizome is reddish looking. It has an orange sap that's very bright. You don't want to get that sap on you. It can, it's not a good thing. It's toxic. Again, it's not gonna, I don't think it will kill you, but it's not something you want to have all over your hands and then not remove. So if you're handling them, if you're trying to garden with them, have some gloves on and wash your hands afterwards. But what I want you to notice here is this curled leaf right here. Okay, so the leaf is curled around the stem. Now this flower is nice and wide open. It's during the day. The flowers do close at night. And I think that's also a protection against cold air, because if it's if it's a nice warm day and it's sunny out, not an issue. But at night it can still get pretty cold in the spring. But this leaf here is one of the keys to bloodroot success. I took this picture actually this morning, so I'm really excited because this is happening right now. If you're out there in the parks looking for it, this leaf you can see is curled around the stem, and it was curled around the flower, but the flower is now poking up above it. But they have these curled leaves, and those leaves help trap warm air against the plant, so that it doesn't freeze, and it helps buffer it against cold nights or cold days or cold weather if there's a sudden cold snap. And so that can make this a pretty cold hardy plant. And you can see this adaptation in some other plants. You also see that some other plants, in order to do the same thing, will have a very hirsute stem, a very hairy looking stem, which can help with that. And I believe this can also inhibit the formation of crystals. So these hairy stems are another adaptation in order to not be affected by the cold. Or you can just generate your own heat like skunk cabbage does. They are, I think it's exothermic, but they can actually generate some heat. And if you were to go out, it's a little late now, but if you were to go out in like February when these start popping up, you could stick a thermometer inside this. This is called a spathe. So hopefully you can see, again, my cursor. So this purple, whoops, that wasn't helpful. This purple structure of the plant kind of looks like a hood. Okay, I always think of it as it looks like a purple snapping turtle opening its mouth to bite something. But this purple hood is called a spathe. And inside the spathe is a spadix. This is the more, I think, functional part of the flower. But inside this spathe, it's going to be warmer. So if you had a thermometer and you went out in, say, February, it was a cold day, you could put the thermometer in here and you'd find out that it's warmer in here than it is outside in the air, which is really amazing. There's a lot of debate over what that heat means. skunk cabbages don't have a very good smell. That's why they're called skunk cabbage. You can get that smell from the leaves, but I believe, if I remember correctly, they have a rotting meat kind of smell, which is what attracts flies. Flies are some of the earliest pollinators, and rotting meat is a very good way to attract flies to come into your flower to pollinate them. And they can attract pollinators. And one of the thoughts that I read was that being warm in there makes the pollinator stay longer before it leaves, so there's more of a chance of it get the pollen on its legs, or if it's already got the pollen on its legs, it getting the pollen onto your flower. Um, I don't. I've also read, so I can't say that that's the reason. I've also read that it has nothing to do with pollinators or attracting pollinators or keeping pollinators, and that heat that it produces might have something to do with the development of the flower or the development of seeds after pollination. So I think it's still up in the air, and I think that there's not an entirely very good understanding yet of why it generates its own heat. But it does that, and so I think that's one of these fascinating things. And again, skunk cabbage, you can find the leaves, the leafy part of the plant for a long time in the summer, and it doesn't quite fit that definition of spring ephemeral, but it's here and it's quick and it takes advantage of that early time, and I feel like it's if not an actual spring ephemeral, certainly in the spirit of it. So engage partners. Okay, so there's not a lot of critters out there, so if you can get a partner, don't be choosy, and see if you can engage somebody. So again, back to our eastern skunk cabbage. You're warm. Whoever you can get in there to help pollinate, get moving from flower to flower. That's really good news. Here's a crocus and snowdrops, which are not native, but these are plants that do take advantage of these early pollinators. Again, this is another one of those mining bees. It's the genus is Andrina. I don't know the actual species, and I think it's very similar bee over here. Some of the sweat bees, the halictids, will also come out in early spring as well. And there's a host of flies that will take advantage. So a lot of times you'll see very more white flowers in early spring. And white flowers are one of those colors that you tend to find a lot of flies go to, and sometimes they have some very strong scents that we wouldn't necessarily appreciate, but that's how they get the flies in. I don't know if snowdrops have that smell or not, but there's not a lot of plants out there, and so if you can attract whoever is out there, don't be picky. Get them in, get them picking up this pollen. You can see all that pollen at the bottom of the crocus there, but get that pollen on them and get them moving to another one of your flowers. Another one of your species flowers. And there are early species of bumblebees, as I showed you that earlier picture, the two-spotted bumblebee that's already out. And there are several spring wildflowers like the Dutchman's breeches that depend on bumblebees for pollination. So you've got them. Now keep their interest. Now, how do you keep their interest? One of the things that a lot of these bees are going to do, like bumblebees, there are there are some bumblebees that are colonial, like honeybees. There are several bumblebees that are solitary. Those females that are out and looking for food are often more interested in pollen, especially as a food source for their young. So several plants like this is bloodroot again, like bloodroot, like hepatica, I think even mayapple, produce little or no nectar. They just produce pollen, and that pollen is still very attractive to these pollinators. And they come in for the pollen, and they go from flower to flower, again carrying the pollen. Hopefully you can see in this image. Excuse me. Hopefully you can see in this image there's a lot of pollen in the inner parts of that flower there, and a lot on the petals as well. Okay, and that pollen is a really good meal for their young, and so the bees are happy to collect that pollen, take it back and feed their young. They'll eat some of it as well. It could be very nutritious. And so many, I don't know if I want to say many, but there are several spring ephemerals that will just forego producing nectar because the pollen is going to be enough. Something else they're going to produce. So you've been successful. You've been pollinated. You produce seeds. Plants like bloodroot, I think yellow trout lily. There's several produce seeds with something called an elaiosome on them, and this elaiosome is a fatty. I think it's full of lipids. It's pretty tasty. A little extra covering on top of the seeds. Okay. That's there for ants. I always struggle with this word. I'm going to say Myrmecochory. I could be wrong, but I don't trust any of the YouTube videos I looked up that were giving me pronunciations. They all sounded like they were just uh, generated by AI or a computer, and that none of them actually knew what they're saying, and everyone was different. So I didn't feel like I got the correct one from any of them. But Myrmecochory essentially is, I think if I remember correctly, Mir is in reference to the ants, and this is depending on these ants to pick up your seed and disperse them. See, the ant's got its jaws there. This is the elizome. This is the seed. This is the tasty part. What you're hoping is the ants are big enough and hungry enough that they're going to grab your seed because they want that elizome. They're going to take it back to their nest and they're going to eat the elizome there. Then what happens is the seed gets put on the dispersal pile and it grows from there. And so why is this beneficial? Because certainly some of these ants could just be like, I'm just going to eat this elizome right here. This is really tasty, and I'm out. And that especially for like smaller ants that can't lift, because ants can be pretty strong, but they still have limits just like we do. And perhaps some of these seeds are too big for the ants to pick up and return to their nest. So what the plants are hoping for is that this will attract the ants enough to pick them up and take them back to their nest. And this is, again, you're as a plant, you're not just developing seeds, you're also investing a lot of energy in this extra coating to attract the ants. So you're hoping that this plan works. And of course, there's failure. There's cheaters that will eat the elizome or the seed, but there are enough that do this that obviously it's been a successful strategy. Okay, these are prairie trillium. Trilliums will also do this. So you can see these are the seed pods, and here are the seeds with nice big fatty elizome on the end, on the one end there, and that's what the ants are trying to collect and eat. And again, hopefully they're not just eating them in situ; they're taking them with them and eating them back at the nest. So why is that important? For a couple reasons. Um, when apples fall straight from the tree onto the ground, the seeds in that apple might get into the ground there. Probably not going to grow right under the parent tree. Shaded out. You've already got you're not going to be able to compete with that network of roots, and it just is probably not going to be a good idea. And so, when you look at fruits, I think a lot of people understand you get a fruit. Animal eats the fruit. The seeds go through the digestive tract, poop out the seeds. The seeds have been spread somewhere new, and a lot of seeds are essentially activated. They go through some chemical stresses where that actually trigger a response within the seeds, so that once the seed is out and on the ground, they'll germinate because they've been through the gut of an animal, and so that can be really, really important and successful. And I'll talk about one of those in a little bit. But dispersal distance for ants, it could be the maximum. I think I read was like 180 meters, which would be great, but typically the average is 2 meters or less, which is 6 feet. That's not a ton. And so you'll often see these colonies of bloodroot have the young and the old are right next to each other. Bloodroot actually develops a pod and the seeds pop, and that spreads them a certain distance, and then ants can contribute to that distance. But that seed popping like that can actually contribute to more than 50% or contribute to a 50% greater dispersal when they do that. So there are several species that do that they just they pop and they're spreading these seeds first. So that's the dispersal distance. And then again, the ants picking up the seeds and taking them back, or worst case scenario, you shoot the seeds out and the ants pick them up, but the nest is closer and they come back. But what's great about this is directed dispersal. What's essentially happening is you have these ants picking up your seeds and taking them back to their nest, and then they eat the elysomes, and this part of the seed that's important for you as the plant that you want to grow, because that's your genetic dispersal, that gets thrown onto the discard pile, which is great because a lot of times it's rich in phosphorus and potassium, because in addition to being discard pile, might also be ant waste there as well. So it's going to be nutrient rich ideally, and number three, it's going to be in a spot where there's not a lot of seed predators. There are critters that can hide in with the ants, although a lot of times they eat the ants. There are certain critters that will happily eat the ants, but generally, if you're growing in a a discard pile in an ant nest, you're pretty well protected because a lot of seed predators aren't going to go and bother a whole nest of ants just to get the seeds out of the discard pile. So you're increasing your dispersal distance. Your dispersal is directed to a spot that has higher nutrients and hopefully a better luck of germination, because there's also, whoops, touchy computer, and there's also seed predator avoidance. And again, it also depends on the nature of the interaction. You're hoping that your seed is found by an ant that's large enough to take the seed, is interested in eating the elizome off the seed, but not the seed, and then we'll put it in there. So that's quite a few things. Not every ant is going to do that. There are ants that are cheaters. There are other seed predators that, if they find the seeds, they're just going to eat them as well. And so again, this is one of those strategies where you've produced a lot of seeds. All of them aren't going to make it, but hopefully enough will that you've contributed to the next generation for your offspring. Or you could meet your intended seed dispersal agents halfway or all the way. These are Mayaples. Mayaples have these pretty neat little flowers here, and again, if I remember correctly, they don't produce a lot of nectar either, mostly pollen, but they do attract bees and pollinators. And when this flower gets pollinated, it forms a seed. Mayapple is fairly toxic with everything I've read. Even the green fruits, when the fruits are yellow, it's safe to try them. They don't have a lot of toxicity then. Don't take my recommendation for it. Ask other people. These are some things I read. I am not a forager. Don't have Mayapple in the store, so I've never eaten it. I don't want to give advice, but generally what I've read is the majority of the plant is toxic. These can be less toxic when they're ripe. But one of their main consumers is the eastern box turtle. And part of the reason I say that is box turtles can eat some pretty toxic stuff. They eat a lot of mushrooms. They eat mushrooms that could certainly kill us. Excuse me. So I'm not going to trust that because the box turtle is eating them, they're safe. Box turtles will eat them. And if you look again at where this flower is and where that fruit is going to end up, it's right at the height for a box turtle. This isn't perfect. And so box turtles do consume these and they do spread them. I read somewhere that I've got 30 and 60 in my head, and that's, they're kind of opposites more or less on the scale, but there is a double-digit increase in success. I'll say it that way, cover my bases. There's a double-digit increase in success of seeds from Mayapple when they are consumed by the box turtle and travel through the gut before they are dispersed. And so the seeds of a Mayapple are far more likely to germinate and produce a new colony as long as they've been consumed by a box turtle, gone through the gut, and then obviously defecated. And so, box turtles don't move fast, but they do move, and they have territories. And so box turtle is another way, slow way, but albeit a way to get somebody to disperse your seeds for you. Box turtles aren't the only critters that will eat Mayapple fruit. Eastern gray squirrel, common grackle, white-footed mouse, these are all pretty significant eaters of Mayapples, and so they all like them to various degrees. Again, Mayapple, you'll see these, you'll frequently see these colonies because they're toxic, so you're not going to have deer browse on them or other large herbivores because of the toxicity of the leaves. I think some of you may know my coworker, Jen Souls, and she's very fond of pointing out that the center of this growth of Mayapples here is probably where a box turtle pooped, because that's a good way for these colonies to start. And I was like thinking of that when I see a big patch of Mayapples that maybe a box turtle pooped there years ago, and now you've got this nice patch of Mayapple to enjoy. So thank you, box turtles. And 4C. If no one's going to help you, then just take care of yourself. Some spring ephemerals do have a high level of self-pollination as well. So you got all this extra pollen, and if nobody's eating it, nobody's taking it flower for flower, you some are using it to self-pollinate. Autogamy is another name for self-pollination. And that's one way to ensure. And again, bloodroot also spreads by rhizome. So they got a lot of ways to do this. As well, but if you can't get somebody to pollinate you, you can certainly pollinate yourself and there's going to be more bloodroot for the next generation. And fifth, you bide your time. you're going to wait for, you've got this narrow window. The rest of the year is just waiting. I looked really hard and tried to find some information because my assumption is this is cutleaf toothwort. But my assumption on this next slide, on the left is skunk cabbage after it's been in bloom. On the middle is the big leaves of bloodroot that are left behind that you can find late spring and early summer. And on the right is yellow trout lily after the flowers have disappeared. Excuse me. And my assumption is you still got these leaves up. So these leaves are still photosynthesizing and maybe gathering energy and storing, helping you store energy for next year when you bloom and you begin to flower right away. But I couldn't find anything that reinforced that idea. So I can't say that that's true. Maybe that's just a theory, but these you'll still see these critters there, you'll still see these plants out there. And in some cases they're very distinctive, like these big leaves of skunk cabbage. There's nothing else really around here that's very similar. There are some what's the name of that? Some docks, but I just don't think that if you've seen dock and you've seen skunk cabbage, they look very dissimilar. Twin leaf can look a little similar to the leaves of bloodroot, but again, I think once you've seen it, this is obviously one leaf and not twin leaves. And then the this mottled appearance on the yellow trout lily, which I believe is part of the reason for its name, stands out as well. So they're out there, and some of them again do die off in early summer. They don't make it all the way through the summer. But I just couldn't find anything for, when these structures are still there, what's the point of them being there if the plant has already bloomed, been pollinated and germinated. And my guess is that maybe they're still doing a little energy storage before they're completely shaded out and there's no use to it anymore. So, but you don't have to bide your time. If you want to go out and see some of these spring ephemerals, I can recommend a couple places. We have, if you come to Gulf Branch Nature Center, you can find some of the cutleaf toothwort and the bloodroot. We have bloodroot right next to the driveway in, which is one of my favorites. That's where I took the picture earlier I mentioned. You can head out the trail that heads out towards the Potomac Heritage Trail, where we have a little overlook. We're adjacent to an overlook. It's actually National Park Service land. There's a nice patch of bloodroot out there as well. On the left uphill side away from the stream, and that is directly a result of our removing invasive plant efforts that have been done for years here, where we've had some a monthly pull. So that's fantastic to see. And again, like I said, there's some areas where you can find cutleaf toothwort and false Solomon seal as well, which are some neat ones. Another neat place and again, I'm not very familiar with Long Branch, but I know they have some spring ephemerals as well, so I'm not saying you can't find any there. Windy Run is a great place if you're along the Potomac Heritage Trail. This is a screen grab of it. It's not always the easiest to get down there from the parking lot. That 2420 North Kenmore Street is the parking area for this. But if you can get down there, you'll find the Dutchman's breeches, you'll find bluebells, you'll find cutleaf toothwort and a few other species of spring ephemeral. It's a really beautiful place, and it's getting close to where now would be that time to go down and see them before they're not there anymore. So I'm going to recommend that. One of the places I do recommend, and again, I'm a bug guy and I'm a bird guy. I'm not really a big plant guy, but I like this story of the ephemerals. But one of the places I will recommend is the Trillium Trail at G. Richard Thompson Wildlife Management Area, which is out near Linden. It's on the Blue Ridge, so you get some really neat stuff. You can find this is showy orchis, which is the plant on the left here. This, I can't remember if this is a star chickweed or rue anemone. I think it's one of those two. But this is showy orchis, which is really, really beautiful plant. And there's another bloodroot. The bloodroot's probably blooming there right now. This is yellow lady slipper, which I had a different picture of earlier. And of course, trilliums, lots and lots of trilliums. One of the best areas to see trilliums all around, and I highly recommend it. It's also fantastic because there's a lot of other neat stuff up there. There's a lot of really good invertebrates. Like there's some millipedes up there I haven't seen in other places, which I like. The birds are tremendous if you like your migratory birds. There's a real sweet spot in like early May when you go up there when the trillium and a lot of these flowers are still in bloom, but you've also got a really good host of warblers and spring migrants, and it's a really magical place, and I highly recommend it. There's a very small parking area for it, so get there early, and you do have to get pay for a 1 day permit to go view it. But they're usually pretty good about that. I've never had any trouble doing that or taking a group as well. And that, again, that's the Thompson Wildlife Management Area, and I highly recommend it. It's a really neat place. The Trillium Trail. And of course, if you're out there and you're seeing this stuff, you're taking pictures, you want to contribute to some community science. I know that, and by that I mean citizen science, but I've been in some discussions where community science is definitely a better term because you're really involved in the community and getting them involved in this. Project Budburst is one of these really neat ones where they want you to go out, take pictures of these flowers, and get pictures of when they're in bloom and when they stop blooming. And so it's a phenology, which is the study of natural timing, and they're trying to get a lot of information from that. And this has been going on for several years, and it's a really good project to be a part of. And of course, I'm a big fan of iNaturalist and just getting the information of where these plants are being seen and growing, and sharing that. And this is feeds into a bigger thing, the Global Biodiversity Information Database, and so providing that information so it's available for researchers. I think these are all really laudable goals. So I see you next year when we all grow back and we can talk about this again. But I thank you for your time tonight. I finished a little bit early. Let's see if there's any questions. And let me figure out how to stop sharing my screen here first. And then I can see what everybody's doing. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to add? There's none in. Oh, there's a chat. Oh, there's several comments in the chat. If anybody wants to unmute and just ask a question, go right ahead while I try to catch up on what's in the chat here.
I just wanted to comment that one of the best places to see a spring ephemerals is Bull Run Regional Park, which has loads of bluebells, but in addition, has a lot of spring beauties and all sorts of things. It's just covered with flowers. It's at the right time. It's about now, maybe a few weeks from now.
Yeah, we're heading into that sweet spot. And thank you for mentioning spring beauties. It's one of those ones that they're really common and I often forget them, but that's another one you can see in a lot of Arlington parks as well. And there's I didn't go really into it, but there's a ton of non-native stuff that's in bloom now, and a lot of it isn't invasive. It just happens to come out a little bit earlier. There's the dead nettles. There's squill. Siberian squirrel, which I think is absolutely gorgeous, but it's a non-native, and I hope it doesn't become invasive because it's something I enjoy seeing. There's the snowdrops, which I've heard can be invasive, and haven't really seen them take over in our park like that. And crocus is another one. So some really pretty non-natives out there as well that can be enjoyed in all this wonderful weather. How much warmer is the temperature inside the cabbage plant space than outside? You can answer at the end of the talk. Thanks, Shannon. I don't know the actual difference, but it can be, I feel like it can be 10 to 20 degrees different. And maybe that's Fahrenheit. Maybe that's not as helpful, but it's definitely warmer inside, and it can be rejuvenating for a small invertebrate that is, out there in the cold and maybe is a little sluggish, and they can get a little energy, and it might cause them to stay a little longer and to really warm up and try to gather some energy.
Yeah, this is Shannon. That's
Sure.
a substantial difference. That's a substantial difference, 10 to 20 degrees.
It can be. As we're talking, I'm stalling while I see if I can find something.
I can also look it up after we're done.
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine. Go ahead.
Real quickly, the previous person, was that Bull Run that was mentioned? I didn't quite catch the park name.
He said Blue Run.
Blue Run. Okay.
I think he said Blue Run. And maybe, I don't know. I think Bull Run would, there's a couple Blue Run places that would probably be great as well right now, too. Here's an article that says that they can raise their temperature to 22 degrees Celsius. And that could be very significantly different from the outdoors. Skunk cabbages can raise the temperature of flowers to 22 degrees Celsius, even when the surrounding temperatures are much lower than that. Yeah, and in February around here, it can be much lower than 22 degrees Celsius. I can't do a quick conversion in the top of my head, but I feel like that would be like 50 or 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I might be lowball now a little bit. Somebody asked if there's an Arlington County website that indicates what plants bloom at what time of year in each park. I don't think we have that. I think that would be wonderful. I don't know if you're on iNaturalist, but you can sometimes do a data search and filter your data for certain plants and in a place like Arlington, and we tend to have a little more richer data set because you have so many people that are doing that, and so you might be able to get that information from there, or maybe Project Budburst. I've never actually played much with it, but they collect a lot of data, and that might be there as well. But specifically on our website, I don't think we have something like that. It would be fun though, but I don't think we have something like that. As I mentioned, Windy Ridge, which is along the Potomac, and part of that in the I say Windy Ridge. Windy Ridge, you'll find something in there. When you actually take Windy Ridge out and Windy Ridge ends, you're in the Potomac Heritage Trail, which runs the length of the Potomac. That is one of the best spaces. So down in that river basin is where I was talking about. So you can access it from Windy Run. You can access it from either, Donaldson Run, the Potomac Overlook heading out that way, or from Gulf Branch and getting down to the Potomac Heritage Trail. But all along there, there's a lot of really good spring ephemerals. We had small purple flowers in our yard that come early. Everything. Do you know what they could be? Lisa, I don't. If you want to email me a picture of that purple flower, I'm happy to look at it. I love a good mystery.
That would be great because they come every year,
okay.
And they come about the same time the forsythia blooms, and they're all over our neighborhood. So we're kind of wondering what they were.
Do they have purplish leaves?
Yeah.
Let me try something here. Do they look like... Oh, I gotta come back to you and share my screen. But I think... Yeah, stop presenting. Are you guys seeing my screen? Why is it not doing that? Hold on. Desktop. There we go. Something like that.
No, it doesn't look like that. I'll send you a photo.
Oh no. Okay. Yeah. These are the dead nettles. There's henbit dead nettle and red or purple dead nettle, and they are really common right now.
And they're all over the yards, which is just bizarre. Only in the yards.
Oh.
Yes.
Look up. Is it self-heal? Look up self-heal as well. That might be one that's over the yards a lot. They're tiny, right?
Yeah, they're very small.
Yeah, look up self-heal, SELFHEAL, just like it sounds.
Okay.
I think that might be what you're looking for. But if it's
Thank
not
you.
that, yeah, no problem. Give me a holler. Again, I'm not really much of a plant guy, but this is one of those plant subjects I find really interesting, and so doing what I can. I see. Do I get a hand up? Nope. I see a 1 there. Maybe that's the conversation. Oh, Shannon, did you have another question? I think your hand is up.
What I see sometimes now are daffodils growing wild, just coming up now. They seem to, I don't know if they came from seed. I don't think anyone planted them there. They might be from seed. It's kind of hard to figure out how they got there.
Yeah, and sometimes, I doubt somebody planted them, but they could have been dropped or, eaten by something else and dropped, and they end up out there. We've got a couple patches of daffodil at Gulf Branch, and I've got a few in my yard that I know I didn't, what you call it? I know I didn't plant. Oh, Ian, good point. iNaturalist has an app called Seek where you can take your phone and use the app and get your phone up to it and take a picture of it. I will say this. I had a picture of a beetle I took today, and it identified it as a beetle that's native to Africa. So there are some, Seek is not perfect, but it could get you in the right place. But sometimes if it's something that's very weird or something you never heard of, just double check that it's actually on this continent. I've had a few like that where I've had to go back and be like, no, this is not what those were at all. But for stuff that's more common, which it sounds like if this is in your yard that much, it could very well be very helpful.
I'm going to try it because I looked up self-heal and it's not that either. So I'm definitely going to look at it. I'm going to use Naturalist.
Okay. I'd love to see a picture of it too. I'm very
Okay,
curious.
I'll send one. Yeah.
Okay. And then will you circulate the slide?
Ask Alonzo Bagadas. Actually, he has a website, Capital Naturalist, and you can put a picture there and put it out there, and you'll get an answer very quickly.
Yeah, I'd like this. I'd like the email because I feel lonely. But if you put on Capital Naturalist, you'll get it back. You'll get an answer probably quicker than you will from me.
Okay, thank you.
No
I'll
worries.
still email you.
Oh, thanks. That's true. Let's see. Yeah. I found it's better with plants. It depends on the animal because some it's been really good, and it depends on an angle. The trouble with the app Seek is that it only lets you use one picture. One of the things I really like with iNaturalist is if I take a picture, especially of a plant, a tree, a mushroom, I'm trying to do different angles. If it's a tree, I try to get the bark, the whole shape of the tree, the leaf, and include all those, and you get a much better answer. And with iNaturalist, you get other people chiming in, so you can do that as well. Sometimes people find it right away and answer. Sometimes they don't. It depends on how common it is. But I love using iNaturalist. So when I'm not in a hurry, I use it to identify a lot of stuff. Will you circulate your slides? I will. There will be a recording of this, and I can send that out. Shannon, if you wanted the name of the parks, again, you can email me directly. I can share those with you in the links again to them. And the drive time to the parks. Windy Run is here. Pretty much any of those. Like I said, if you can access the Potomac Heritage Trail from Gulf Branch, from Donaldson Run or Potomac Overlook, from Windy Run. I don't think you can get there from Fort C.F. Smith.
One of the best ways is just walking from Roslyn. Then there's no hill.
Yeah. There's a Pimmet Run, which is like over by Chainbridge. You can do that as well. At the Thompson Wildlife Refuge, it's G. Richard Thompson Wildlife Management Area. It is out in near Linden, so that's I think at least an hour drive west. It's worth it. Stop at the Apple House, get some cider donuts. It'll be a worthwhile trip. My first time out there, I didn't make a good plan. I didn't start the Trillium Trail. I started somewhere else. Got myself lost on the AT because the Appalachian Trail runs through there. Managed to find my way back. The cool thing was I did actually hear a ruffed grouse do the whole where they smack the air in front of their body with the wings and make that rapid sound that sounds like a motor. So again, it's a really cool place to check out. But the Trillium Trail is a much smaller and I think better marked trail for checking it out there.
If you're ever in Shenandoah,
Oh.
Park, Old Rag has a tremendous number of trilliums on it.
Kate, you mentioned picture this. Is that the one that has a cost to it?
What?
Yeah, picture this, it costs some money, but I
Okay.
find it worthwhile because it's really fast. And sometimes when you're out in the field, you can hardly see with the sun glare on your phone as it is.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice to do it quickly.
Yep. I'm trying to remember. I had a plant app for a while and I can't remember what the name it was. And it was okay, but sometimes it would go really astray with the ID. So, if you get an ID that sounds good, fantastic. If you get one and you're not sure about it, do a double check. Just a quick internet search will get you some good pictures. There's a lot of real good, decent information on the internet as well. So definitely do a backup check on some of the results that you get. Oh, very good. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, then I won't keep you. Start planning your wildflower ramble trip. There's a lot of good places around here. I feel like you can see Trillium if you go to. I know you can see actually some Trillium at Fort C.F. Smith. I feel like if you go to Scotch Run, Turkey Run, some of those other bigger parks, like up in the McLean area, you can get Trillium as well. But those big, pretty Trillium in the big numbers, that's, Trillium Trail at Thompson is one of the really good areas to get. So you're all welcome. Thank you very much. I see the kind words, and I appreciate it. I really enjoy it. And if you didn't know, I've got another talk tomorrow on cherry trees, and I think I'll see some of you there. And if you're interested, drop me an email and I'll get you a link. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to hang out here for another minute if there's any questions, but otherwise, let's go ahead and call it a night. Appreciate you.
Ken, this
Yeah.
is Shannon. I just do have a question.
Of course.
When I exchange an email with you, will
Okay.
you have some of these trails and such that we talked about? I don't mean to sound dense, but
That's
most
okay.
of these that I heard about, I have no idea how to access them or where to go.
Okay.
So maybe you could help me out when I email you and
Absolutely.
maybe
I'd be
elaborate
happy
on
to.
some of those. Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Sure.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
And then I would love to participate in your talk tomorrow. I didn't see any advert. Usually I get emails from Parks and Rec, which is how I key into these talks. And this one escaped me for some reason. So I would love to participate if you can send me a link.
Sure. So what happened with this one is it's a partnership with the Cherry Festival, and they're doing stuff at is it Virginia Highlands, I think is the name. And so yeah, and so this is part of it. And so it's essentially deep dive. It's just not named a deep dive. But it's essentially deep dive. And I'm just talking about our native cherry trees.
Mm-hmm.
It's Shancat28, correct?
Yes. Yeah, at
Yes.
Gmail.
Cool.
Yeah,
I just
I
sent you the
did
link.
see I did see in my most recent email from a little blurb about that, about the festival, but I didn't see a talk mentioned. So it's possible
yeah, so
I overlooked
everybody
it.
in they asked everybody in DPR to do some programs to support this. So I mean, there's recreation, there's yoga, there's in-person stuff, there's crafts, there's some virtual things, and so I offered to do a virtual talk on our native cherry trees and how and who depends on them, and so that's what I'll be doing tomorrow night.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yep. It'll be fun.
Yeah, so fantastic, and I enjoyed the talk tonight. It was very, very.
Thank you.
It was a good use of time, which is how I measure the quality of any activity.
I know a lot of people that don't think my talking is a good use of time, so I really appreciate you saying that.
No, not at all. And I've got a limited amount of time left on the planet, so I try to maximize my time every day. And so that's how I assess the quality of any activity. Do I want that time back, or am I happy that I spent that time on that activity? And with you, it's always the latter. So that's a good thing.
Well, I really appreciate it. That's a fine compliment. I wish. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, you and Maddie, it's, both of you do a really, really good job, and I'm appreciative.
I'm happy to share it with her. She's an excellent naturalist. So
yes,
good deal.
She is. So with that, I will be over and out and join you tomorrow. Thank you again, sir, and you have a good night. No problem.
Talk to you tomorrow. You have a good night too. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. All right. I am, unless anybody has any more questions, I'm going to go ahead and leave the conversation. Everybody have a good night.